Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen wa salatu wa salam wa Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajmain wa man tabi'ahum bi ihsanin ila yawmiddin. Alhamdulillahi alladhi hadana li hada wa ma kunna linahtadi lawla an hadana Allah. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqtatam min lisani yafqahu qawli. Rabbi zidni ilman warzuqni fahman. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I would like to welcome you all to another session of ARB 011, Arabic Reading and Writing Made Easy. And we are now going into Module 1D, and we're going to look at two additional letters. Last time we looked at the letters Dal and Ra. And we're going to go further, inshallah, and look at two more letters into this Module 1. So this is the letter Sin, which we are going to study, and the letter Noon. So these are the two letters which we are going to be studying in detail today. The Makharij. This is the table that we've seen a couple of times. And the letter Sin is located, in terms of makhraj, its location is the front part of the tongue. The front part of the tongue, and actually it's the front part of the tongue touching the lower front incisor. The lower front incisor, it touches, or the tongue touches the lower front incisor, and this is the makhraj right here. Even though it's sort of jammed over here with all these other letters, this is the makhraj right here where the highlighter is pointing to. And that's Sin. Sin. The light letter Sin. The next letter is the letter Noon. And the letter Noon, its makhraj actually is the tongue. Again, the front part of the tongue, but it touches the hard palate. It's similar to the location of the Ra, but the phonetics is a bit different. So the Noon is going to be the front part of the tongue and the hard palate, and we'll look into that in more detail. One thing about the Noon is that it also has a nasal sound. So not only does it have the makhraj being the front part of the tongue, but there is a very important nasal component. And if you cut off the nasal component, the Noon sound will be greatly distorted, as we will see. So just keep that in mind. The Noon is what we call the gunna sound, and it has a very important nasal quality to it. So let's go further, and we'll look at the morphology of this Sin. Let's study the Sin first. So the Sin, of course, being written from right to left, is the following. Okay, is the following. Okay. Two curved lines. That's the Sin. This is, again, I'm writing the Sin as if you were to have the Sin as the first letter in a word. The first letter in a word, because you know that words are composed of letters. And the Sin by itself is this. This is the full form of the Sin. And the full form of all the letters are expressed when they are the last letter in a word. Okay. Usually, when it is the first letter or the middle letter, the full form becomes truncated. Like if you look over here, this Sin is different than this because the last part is not expressed. Only the first part is shown right here. Okay, right here. Very simple. Okay. And this part, this end right here is the part which connects to the following letter. Okay. So, for example, Sadis. Sadis. Here you have the sin being connected with this to the alif. Sadis. Alif can connect only to a preceding letter. After it, alif does not connect. Okay, and this is the dal, which here, because the alif does not connect, it's not connected to the dal, and after the dal, of course, we know dal does not connect, and then we have the sin. Okay. Otherwise, the sin in general, in terms of connectivity, it may connect to its preceding or the letter after it. But here we have the sin being connected to a letter alif. And if it's the middle letter, same thing. It can connect, it may connect to both its preceding and also the letter after, depending on what's the letter. Because if the letter, for example, here is a vowel, it cannot connect. Vowel cannot connect after it. Dal cannot connect after it. Ra cannot connect after it. So there will be a space. Okay, there will be a space. So, for example, we have the word tasjudu. Tasjudu. So here we see that the sin or the ta connects to the sin, and the sin connects to the jim. Okay. So here we see the sin and its connectivity to its preceding letter and the letter which follows it. Okay. So just have to practice a bit the writing and be familiar a little bit with its connectivity, and you'll be good, inshallah. Because if you don't know, then you'll be writing wrong. You'll be writing wrong. Okay. Let's go forward. And the last part, of course, is if the sin is in its full form. So here we see the sin in its full form at the end of a word. So, for example, we have the word here we have ra, hamza, ya, but the most important is that the last letter of this word is sin, ra'is, ra'is. So here the sin is connected to the ya by this little part right here. Okay, this is its connection, and the sin is expressed in its full form at the end of this word, ra'is. Okay, ra'is. For example, if there's no, let's just say, I'm not sure if this is a word, I don't believe so, but let's just say das. Das. Here, because the alif cannot connect to the sin, because alif is the word, any word, a letter after alif is disconnected. This is why sin is expressed fully without any connection because of the alif. And here alif does not connect to the dal because the dal does not connect to any word after it. Okay, after it. But this would be one word. You can't say, that would be wrong. This would be wrong. Okay. So we will inshallah get used to this as we do more practice of the letters and go through all the different letters of the alphabet, and it will not be a difficult issue. Okay. So let's go forward and look more depth into the sin and its different characteristics. The sin, the English equivalent, is the high-pitched S as in C. As in C. The difference is that in English, the sin or the S sound, the S sound, does not emanate from touching or the tongue touching the tip of the lower incisor. Okay. The tongue does not contact the teeth at all in English. And thus, the sin in the Arabic sin has a higher pitch than the English S. Okay. Please also note that there's a very similar letter in Arabic called the Sod, and it's very important to distinguish this Sin from the Sod. But the Sod is a heavy letter, and we've said that it's more difficult to pronounce heavy letters with respect to the light letters. So, for example, if we're pronouncing the Sod, often the person trying to pronounce it will, if there's a mistake, he will be mistakenly pronouncing the Sin instead of the Sod, or basically the Sod will be transformed into really a Sin if it's not being articulated correctly, because it's more harder to pronounce the heavy letter. The main problem what students do is that they, instead of pronouncing the heavy letter, they pronounce it more lightly than it should be. Okay, for light letter to be pronounced heavy, that's not the norm. Okay, usually that's not the norm in terms of making a mistake. Usually it's the other way around. But anyway, it's important regardless to be able to distinguish phonetically the Sod from the Sin. Since we're learning the Sin, know its, again, characteristics. It's more high pitched, and it's also a light letter. Makhraj. Now we mentioned that the makhraj of the Sin is the tip of the tongue contacting the lower teeth, particularly the front incisor. Right here. That's the lower teeth. Okay? And that's the makhraj. Please note that the Sod also has the same makhraj. However, the tip of the tongue is, for the Sod, it presses a little bit more harder. An easy way to articulate the Sin is to make a smile, okay, which facilitates it, and we'll see that in just a few moments. And the Sin, again, we mentioned it's more high-pitched than the Sod, which is more heavy. Okay, this is the Sod right here. Okay. The key thing, of course, is to make sure that your ears distinguish the Sin from the Sod. Okay. So let's look at the makhraj, the pictorial representation, and we see that here you have the tip of the tongue touching the teeth. Okay, touching the teeth. And you have, this is the Sin. Okay, so put the tip of your tongue against the lower incisor, the lower teeth, and then make a smile. S, s, as, as, as. Okay, you see the high-pitched S sound, right? More higher pitch than the S and C. That's an approximation. But most English S words, like super, for example, sound, the tongue does not touch the tip of the, or the inside of the lower incisor. It does not. Okay. But in Arabic, it does. Sin. Sin. The tip is touching the lower incisor. Okay, and you have, it's easier to articulate if you just make a little bit of a smile, right? Get that frown off, and as, sa, su, si. Okay, si. So we say as. Again, remember that for the makhraj to be identified in any letter, just put a sukun on that letter, and before it add a alif fatha. As, as. We have us, us, us. Then we have is, is, is. Here we are able to enunciate all the different makhraj of the Sin sound. Okay, let's go forward, and we have the sa, 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 sa. Again, not sa, but sa. The jaw just lowers a little bit, and you make a little smile. Sa, sa. If you want to do the Sin with the dhamma, you do su, 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 su. Again, 1 second, right? Not more longer, not more shorter. And then we have si, si, si. Again, you're just making the smile and just enunciating. Seen, as long as the tip of the tongue is at the bottom tooth, all right, touching the bottom tooth, and just exhale a little bit and you're done. That is the proper sound of the seen. As, as, sa, su, si, as, us, is. Okay, that's the seen. Okay. A bit different than the S in English, because the thing is that in the S, the tongue does not touch the teeth. So just be aware of that. You just have to practice a little bit, and again, just train your tongue to be Arabic. That takes a little bit of effort, of course. Practice, 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 because the tongue, all our tongues need to be in shape. Okay. So let's look at the phonetics and the sound of the scenes in the Quran al-Kareem. We'll listen to Sheikh Abdullah Baswar.
هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن سبع سماوات وهو بكل شيء عليم.
Okay, so here the Sheikh recited to us this ayah, and ثم استوى. Okay, here we have the seen with the sukoon, and then we have the إلى السماء. Here we have the seen again, sa. فسواهن sa, فسوى سبعة sa. Again, samawat. Again, you see the high-pitched seen sound. Again, let's listen to it again one more time.
هو الذي خلق لكم ما في الأرض جميعا ثم استوى إلى السماء فسواهن سبع سماوات وهو بكل شيء عليم.
That is the scene. Another example. Now here we're going to see one scene. There's only one scene in this ayah. However, I want you to also see how this is different than the heavy sawd. The heavy sawd, which has a very similar makhraj. Okay. But just note that the scene is more high pitched. The sawd has a lower pitch, but it's more heavy. Okay, so when you are listening to the Quran al-Kareem, you should be able to differentiate between the seen and the sawd. That's actually a little difficult. You will see it's a little difficult, but there is a definite difference there. Okay, because that results in a greatly distorted meaning. You cannot interchange these two letters. That is really a big mistake. Okay, so it's important also for the listener to be able to condition the ears to pick up the different phonetics of the different letters, and that's how we will be able to appreciate the different Arabic words properly, and Arabic properly also altogether. So let's look at this next ayah.
أو كصيب من السماء فيه ظلمات ورعد وبرق يجعلون أصابعهم في آذانهم من الصواعق حذر الموت والله محيط بالكافرين.
Once again.
أو كصيب من السماء فيه ظلمات ورعد وبرق يجعلون أصابعهم في آذانهم من الصواعق حذر الموت والله محيط بالكافرين.
So here we see the differentiation of the seen from the sawd. Okay, كصيب كصيب من السماء. صيب versus sama. Because if we were to, let's just say, let's just try to make a mistake and make the sod into a sin. Okay, it would be kasayyib, not kasayyib. Kasayyib. Okay, or for this word asabiya, let's interchange this with the sin. It would sound like asabiya, asabiya, not a versus the correct asabiya. So you see the difference between the sod in asabiya versus a asabiya. Okay, there's a more high pitched sound and it's more lighter versus the heavy sod. Okay, again, practice makes perfect, and it's important. Again, one part of tajweed is those letters which are similar to each other have to be differentiated, have to be articulated different, and also the listener needs to also be aware in terms of their hearing to differentiate and distinguish between these similar letters. Very important as well. So it's responsibility of both parties to be able to tune in, right, so that we can appreciate the different letters which are being recited. Let's go forward. And now we're going to shift gears into another letter, the noon letter. Okay, the noon. So writing the noon. This is the noon in its full form right here. You can say it's a sort of sideways C, or like a cup here, right? Cup here with a dot on top. Okay, and that's the noon. That's the noon. So the first form of noon again will be when the noon is the first letter of a word. Okay, so here this is the noon, the first letter of a word, right here, right here. Just like the ba and other letters. There's other letters which are going to be very similar, have a very similar format to the noon in terms of its beginning as a letter of a word. Because remember here, this is not the full form. The full form of the noon is, guess what? When is that expressed? That's expressed when the noon is actually the last letter of a word. Okay, but because it's the beginning letter, it's going to be truncated. If it's the middle letter, it's also going to be truncated. Okay, so here's the first letter. And you have the dot, of course, as well. So this is the noon, it's the first part. Okay, the noon. Let's write a example. Noon, dhamma, wow. And this is the noon which is not connected because of the wow. But this is the noon as the first letter of a word. Okay, first letter of a word. Now please note this is very similar to the ba, but the ba has a dot underneath. The ta, which has two dots, or the tha. So it's very important when you see this type of morphology to this dot gives it away. This dot is very important because if you mistaken this for the ba has a dot at the bottom. The ta has a dot, two dots at the top, and the tha has three dots on top. Very similar morphology, but the noon has only one dot. Okay, almost identical to the ba, ta, tha, just the dots, the number of dots, and the location of the dots as well, because the ba has the dot at the bottom. Also, we have the ya as well. The ya has two dots on the bottom as well. So it's actually similar to four letters. Okay, four letters. Let's go forward. And noon as the middle letter. Noon as the middle letter is written like this. Okay, very similar. All I'm doing to this is just I'm going to just make a little connection here. Okay. Seen, noon. See here we have the connection here. The connection here, right here. and here it connects again to something else. Okay, but here is this is the noon. The noon in its as a middle letter in a word. Okay, again, it may connect to both its preceding and the letter afterwards, depending on the characteristic of the letter. Okay, it will connect to the letter afterwards, but before it can be variable. For example, bint. Okay, so here this is the ba, and let's look at one more. Here you have, okay, ba here. This is the noon now. This is the noon right here, and bint. So here you have the noon, bint. It's connected here and it's connected here. Now what if it were not connected? Okay. For example, you have the word this is not a word, but I'm just trying to give you an example. You have dal, wa, noon, and ta. So here you have doon, but the vowel does not connect here to the noon. The noon is the middle letter, but it's not connected because of the vowel. The vowel cannot connect afterwards. Okay, so here we have this example where sometimes, based on not the noon itself, but another letter, the noon does not connect. So we say that the noon may connect to both its preceding and the letter afterwards. And so you have the noon right here. Okay, and the last but not least is the final full form of noon at the end, and we see it's connected here by this little thing right here, and the full form is expressed here. So for example, you have doon. The vowel does not attach afterwards. But for example, if you have deen, it does attach. The word deen, dal, ya, noon, it does attach. Okay, so this little thing right here, attachment, allows it to attach to words so that there is continuity when possible. Okay, so this is the noon in its full form when it is the last letter of a word. Okay, so now let's go forward and look at the phonetics of the noon and the makhraj. The noon equivalent is the n in the English word none. 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 Okay. And again, the English noon does not equal to the n in English. Only this is an approximation because of the makhraj. Because of the makhraj. In Arabic also we have the component of the noon sound, the nasalization sound, right? We mentioned that in Arabic, as we will see very shortly, that the noon sound is accompanied by nasalization. The nasal passages have a very important role in the complete appropriate sound of the noon. And in tajweed, noon is an extremely important letter. There are many rules which directly relate to the noon, particularly the noon sakin. The sakin or the sukoon on the noon, it is a very central letter, and there are many different rules which relate to that in terms of tajweed, as we will inshallah later see at the end or near the end of the course. Let's go forward. So the noon sound is going to be mentioned from the nose. The gunna refers to the nasal sound of the noon. Okay. Again, not a term you need to memorize, but it's a very common, frequent terminology you may hear in tajweed, so that's why I'm mentioning it. The nasal sound occurs when there is a sukoon on the noon letter, and that nasal sound that's when it's expressed. Okay, but other times also when you have, if you have noon fatha, nun, dhamma, also there is a nasal component as well. But the nasal sound is most obvious when the nun has a sukun on it. Like for example, if you have alif, fatha, nun. So if you have alif, fatha, and nun, an, this is where the nasalization would be most obvious. Okay, you have an. So you basically have a sound of the noon of 2 seconds. 2 second sound on most letters when you have a noon sakin. So you don't just say an, you say an. Okay, from the nose again, an, 2 seconds, an. And that's a unique characteristic about the noon, is that most letters, when you see this something sakin on the noon, you elongate the noon for an extra second, not just an, but an. And we'll see that more detail later on to get you, inshallah, accustomed to that rule. Okay, so this is the pictorial representation of the makhraj of the noon. We mentioned that the makhraj encompasses the tip of the tongue, the front part of the tongue, and touching the hard palate. Okay, but the nose is also being represented here to remind you that there is also a nasal component to the makhraj of the noon. Taking away the nasal component takes away from the appropriate quality of the noon sound, as we just mentioned. Okay, so you have an, but we mentioned that typically when you have the noon sakin or the sukoon on the noon with the alif preceding it, you have elongation a bit. So an would be, and this is typically when there's a an followed by another letter or another word. But often you would hear for the an would be an. So this is the noon, an. Okay, the tongue touches the top of the front part of the hard palate. Na, an. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pinch my nose just to show you what happens when the nasal sound is taken away. So you have an. Okay, right? You have an. You hear that 2 second, right? The 2 second an sound. Let's do it again now without the nose. An. So part of that sound is taken away when the nasal cavity is closed or you're not using the nose. So it's important to note that. So you have an, un. Again, that front part, the hard palate and the tip of the tongue, has to touch. That's the noon sound. And it's also why the noon is a bit different than English, because of that nasal quality. Un, in, okay, in. Now, we looked at the nasal quality. We looked at the prolongation of the noon for 2 seconds, not just 1 second. Usually, we don't say an. We say an, un, in. However, there are times in the Arabic when the noon is shortened to an, or un, or in. And that depends on the letter which follows it. So that's why, even though I'm mentioning this, we're going to, inshallah, go over this later on in the course and look at, in more detail, the different principles regarding the noon. Okay. Just right now, the most important thing is know the makhraj, and also realize that there is an important nasal component, and know that sometimes the noon sound, the noon sakin sound is prolonged, the nasal sound is prolonged, depending on the letter which follows it. But that's an advanced discussion because we haven't even looked at all the letters yet. Okay, so noon, you can sometimes have prolongation of it. Okay, and it's from the nose. There is a component from the nose. So let's look at na, nu, Nu, ni, ni. Again, the tongue, the hard palate, make sure it's located there. Make sure that's the place of articulation. If it's the case, then you're good. You're good. Na, 1 second again. Nu, 1 second. Ni, 1 second. And that's the noon. Let's look at the noon as pronounced in the Quran Kareem.
والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون.
So here the different noon being a very common letter in the Arabic language. Here we have many different noons. Here is noon fatha. Here we have noon dhamma. Here we have noon with a sukoon, and you may have noted that the noon is prolonged by the Shaykh in his recitation. Again, the same scenario here with unzila. Unzila, the noon is prolonged. And here also the noon is prolonged. Letter really has a sukoon on it, but many times in Arabic you will note that sukoon is not put on many letters, but it's implied. It's an implied sukoon. Many letters in Arabic may not even have any tashkil or the vowel signs there because it's understood to be present by those who know the Arabic language fully. So here min is really min qablik, min qablik. And here we have the noon dhamma and the noon fatha. Okay, so let's go. Let's listen to this one more time.
والذين يؤمنون بما أنزل إليك وما أنزل من قبلك وبالآخرة هم يوقنون. In
pronunciation of unzila, it's not unzila, but it's unzila. The noon is prolonged because it has a sukoon. Same thing with min qablik. The noon has a sukoon on it and it's prolonged. And with this we will conclude, and we will inshallah finish this lecture in the next session, and we look forward to having you. أقول قولي هذا وأستغفر الله لي ولكم ولسائر المسلمين فاستغفروا إنه هو الغفور الرحيم. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.